What's up guys, welcome back to the channel and to another weekly 3D model. This week we're going to be making a compass. So this week's video is going to be similar to last week's. I will be jumping in here and there to explain some of the things I'm doing, but it's going to be more like a time-lapse video just because things are getting really hectic over here as I'm planning to pack and move across the country, so I don't have a lot of time unfortunately, but I did manage to squeeze in a quick video for this week and I decided to make this military compass. So let's dive into it. Alright, so to start things off, we're going to select the cube and we can start blocking out all of those main shapes. Now I'm not working off of any dimensions or schematics or anything like that, so I'm just kind of winging this along the way, and I'm using some photos I found on Google Images. Now I'm using this photo specifically as my main reference, so I'm just going to try to make it as accurate as I can to this photo. Now the only thing that I really know dimension wise is the width of the shape. It's basically just as wide as a cylinder, so I'm going to insert one cylinder as the main compass shape on top. That way I can start blocking everything around that, and hopefully I can make this look proportionally accurate to that reference photo. So let's go ahead and just continue blocking things out and we can start piecing together our compass. Now for the front piece here where this little dial is, I could have modeled this as a separate piece and it probably would have been a little bit easier, but as you can see in the reference photos, a lot of these plastics are combined into one object. You can see some nice bevels around those edges, so I thought I would just combine it into one shape. So I'm just going to select these faces on the front and extrude them out. That way I have one piece of plastic that I can work with as the base, and hopefully it's going to look a little bit more realistic when we add in some nice bevels. Alright, so the main base is now blocked out and looking pretty good. Next up is that main compass shape. Now, if I went back and redid this model, I probably would have went at this a little bit differently. What I decided to do was just make it really high in poly so I have a lot of edges. That way I can scale them inwards to have all the little sharp edges around the whole dial piece. I was just really trying to keep this week's video under my 2-hour time limit, which I finally did achieve since I've been going over it lately. However, I did rush this part. I just thought that I could quickly bevel some of these edges, and then I can just move on to some other things. Now, if you wanted to have a lower poly model, you could obviously just get away with this in the texture, and you can add some cool little like ribbed texture effect or bump effect on the outside faces. In this case, I wanted to have a little bit of a higher poly model, something that looked a little bit more photorealistic, so I decided to quickly do it this way. So I decided just to crank up the subdivisions to have a lot of edges around the cylinder. That way I can scale them in to have the little ribbed effect around the edges. Alright, so here's a little quick tip. As you see, I have to go around the cylinder and select every second edge, and that can be pretty time consuming. For example, I totally forgot that this existed and I just had to manually go and select every second edge, but there's a much quicker way to do this, and you can do that with a mel script. So if you write this text into your mel script, you can easily select every second, third, or fourth, or how many edges you want around your object. And all you have to do is just change that last number. For example, change that 3 to a 2 or to a 4, depending on how many edges you want to select. So in this case, I could have just changed that edge ring to number 2. And then if I pressed enter, every second edge around this shape would have been selected. And I would have selected all of these edges much quicker, and it would have saved me a lot of time. So I'll show you really quickly an example of how this script works. And then you can copy this down for future videos if you want to just save yourself a little bit of time. Alright, so here's a quick example of how this script works. So I'm just going to really quickly create a cylinder, and I'm just going to increase those subdivisions up to something really high. And let's just say you wanted to select every second edge around the cylinder. Now that would be pretty time consuming if you were to manually go around and click them. But if we were to paste that mel script in the bottom here, and I'm going to change that last number to 2. Now if we go and select one of these edges and I press enter, you'll see that every second edge is now selected. So that can be very handy and helpful and save you a lot of time while you're creating your models. So let's just continue blocking all these shapes out. We can finish up this modeling, and then I can quickly go over how I did those UVs. Alright, so that's everything for the modeling. Now let's just quickly go over how I did all of those UVs. Alright, so here is the model in its finished form. So what I decided to do was break this model into two different groups for the two different textures applied. So on the very first group and texture is the whole bottom piece, including the dial and all the little things. And the second group and texture is everything else, so just the top piece and then this side little object as well. I most likely could have just combined this into one texture because this model is so small, but I wanted to get the most out of those textures and the resolution, so I decided to break this thing up into two. Now I could have obviously spent a little bit more time straightening some of these shells, but I really wasn't concerned because I wasn't going to add any specific detail onto them, so I knew it wouldn't really matter, so I just cut the corners wherever I could. So now let's jump into Substance Painter so we can start texturing. Alright, so now jumping over to Substance Painter, we can go load in our FBX file and bake out our textures. Alright, so I'm going to start off with my first texture in my texture set list, and we can start applying some smart materials to some of these meshes. Now I'm going to start off with that see-through glass material, and then we can move on to some of those plastics after. Now there was a lot of different versions of this compass online in different colors, so there's black and beige, green. The one I was modeling was more of a greenish beige kind of color, so I decided to go with that. However, when I was in Photoshop afterwards just preparing the thumbnail, I by accidentally switched the colors from green to black, and I actually liked it. I thought it looked pretty good, and I was really tempted to actually go back and switch the colors on my compass, but I decided to go with this more green beige kind of color. But let me know what you guys think in the comments, because I was really close to changing it. Alright, so when it came time to apply some graphics on top of my compass, I just really quickly jumped onto Google Images and I googled military compass and I found some top-down images that I can use for those graphic images. Now luckily I came across this image that was very similar or exactly like the reference photo that I was using, so I just copied this one, I dragged it into Photoshop, and I made a few different images for all of my different graphics. So I made one for the outside green ring, and I made one for the inside white face, and also for those little lines or symbols that are on the top glass. I broke those all up into separate images so I can manually adjust how bright and how colorful those colors were, and it would also make applying these materials and graphics very easy when I jump back into Substance Painter. So all I did was save these as JPEGs or PNGs, assign them as textures, and then I could just paste those directly onto the mesh. Now if you spent a little bit more time, you could probably even make some custom nice graphics or make these images look a little bit better and more clear, but this was the quickest and I thought the most efficient way with my time to getting these graphics done, just reusing an image online that I could just repaste onto my mesh. So let's go ahead and start applying some of these graphics so we can start making this compass look a little bit more like a compass. Alright, so the compass is coming together. Next up is doing all of those measurements and lines on the sides of the compass. So this was pretty straightforward, very similar to how we did the other graphics. I just jumped into Photoshop and I made my own alpha. So I just drew a bunch of centimeter lines and meter lines on the opposite side and save that as a JPEG. And then I can drag that image directly into my Substance Painter project and set that as an alpha. And then all I have to do is just line up that alpha with the side of my object, and I can paste that measurement directly onto the side. Now I end up making some small adjustments to this graphic later on. I end up just removing it, jumping back into Photoshop just to make the line width a little bit thinner, as well as the font a little bit smaller. It was looking a little bit too thick. And then following the exact same steps, I just re-import it and paste it directly onto my mesh. So let's go ahead and start applying all of those measurements on the sides of my compass. Alright, so the textures are looking good and the compass is coming along. We're almost done. We just have a few more meshes to apply some materials to. So next up is that gradient inclination. Now this was a little bit tricky to find, but I ended up coming across a Google image that I just copied, and I dragged that into Photoshop to basically straighten it out. And then similar to how we did the other graphics on our compass, I'm just going to save that as an image, drag it into my Substance file as a texture, and then I can just paste that directly onto my mesh. Now on that reference photo, there was that little metal piece that was hanging down on top of it. So in Photoshop, I just erased that from the image so it looks like it wasn't there. Because I have my own as a piece of geometry, I didn't want that to be showing on the image directly below it. So I just removed that, and then similar to the other graphics, I'm just going to paste it directly onto the mesh. So let's go ahead and wrap up these last few materials that we need to apply, and then we can finish up this compass model. Alright, so that's basically everything. That is the whole texturing and modeling process that I did to create this military compass. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to see more weekly 3D content. Now just a heads up, because these weeks are getting crazy busy for myself planning this whole move across the country, I will probably have to take off a few weeks. Now I can probably squeeze in one more for next week, but I thought I'd give you guys a heads up that there might be a week or two that I'm gonna probably miss, just because I'm gonna be driving across the country. I just can't model as I'm driving, unfortunately. Anyways, thanks for tuning into this week's video, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.